film, and really honored to be here with Casey and Pedro and you, of course, Alice, and everyone at XR. So I'll leave it at that.
Pedro, maybe do you want to go introduce yourself? Because Casey is gone.
Hello, dears. I'm Pedro Cunha. Very grateful and honored to be here talking with these amazing people and someone that I have learned so much since I got in touch by seeing the movie, and learning more about their work for me was a really meaningful experience. And I used to say that in this life I came in Rio de Janeiro, but I feel myself from Latin America, and I'm from Extinction Rebellion Rio de Janeiro, and also LATAM, that is the Latin American group. And very proud and happy to be here, and wondering to have a great dialogue with you all. I will pass it on to, I think it's only Casey to present herself.
All right. Hello, everyone. I just got my computer audio to work here, so I'm grateful to tune in just in time for an introduction. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's good to be with everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed Condor and the Eagle. It was a powerful time. My name is Casey Camp Hornick. It's my colonized name. Juzi Witike Panka of the Mashte Panka, Oklahoma. My true name is Juzi. I'm a Ponca woman from Oklahoma in an occupied territory. My original homeland's Nebraska, called Nebraska in the United States way. Many years ago, when Clement and Sophie came through, we had been experiencing one death a week in a community of 600 to 800, all directly related to the extractive industry in our territory, experiencing environmental genocide and knowing exactly where it's coming from and how it's happening, and feeling a certain helplessness about how to deal with it. And at the same time, understanding that we come from generations throughout the millenniums and have always had to find a way to and move around to a place of going forward, despite whatever obstacles might be there. So we've arrived at a time now that's even interesting, and it's been a new way for me as a woman of 72 to figure out how to use a computer. Brian and Clement have been wonderful in helping me find the equipment to organize, with even getting how to do these Zoomings, because COVID-19 has put another of us. So as we come together at this time without having dirtied the air in any way, flying to be together, without using any of the sources of life that others call resources, they are actually moving Extinction Rebellion in the ways of my relative Brian and the ways of people forward into a new dimension of understanding of how we move in concert with our Mother Earth and their sky, then to utilize them as a long way to introduce, but hi.
No way is too long. Thank you all for being here so much. And hello to everybody who's now joining us either here in the Zoom or on Facebook. You are stepping into a live Q&A session between two of the amazing cast members of the film The Condor and the Eagle and two activists from Extinction Rebellion, a global environmental movement. I suppose for many of us who are on this Zoom, having come from XR, having just seen a very moving film, their first question is probably, how should individual activists within XR, and also how should XR as a movement, in your opinions, Brian, Casey, do you think should be supporting, how should they be supporting Indigenous fights and frontline community fights?
I'm going to let Casey go first. Not let, actually, it's just, out of respect, we always elders speak first.
Smart boy, very smart boy. We've taught you well, young man. Oh, goodness, it is true that I tried to make him understand that I do have all the answers. Sometimes it takes me a minute to find them, but just kidding you, Brian. I don't know how we can not help one another at a time like this. I think Extinction Rebellion is on the crest of the wave that the rest of us, I always refer to it as spiritually surfing on this wave of understanding that have come way back from the ancestors and reach way far into the future generations, of how do we attain the idea of oneness with all that is, that has always been in place since the first humans emerged on this Mother Earth, this one true mother that we all share. How do we express the support system that has to be put into place right now as the very web of life is unraveling due to man's ineptness, greediness, and unwillingness to look at the truth? The young people like you all that have picked up this and begun to run with this awareness need to, my opinion, support those of us who have lived this lifetime many times over, first of all, but in this lifetime, been part of this growing awareness from the time that our Mother Earth spoke to us, and from the time that the winds give us truth, and from the time that the waters speak to us. And those of us who work hard to understand how to interpret the actual essence of those living beings and translate it into today's vernacular, called this language that we're sharing together. We need your help, both in a sense of how do you support the organizations that we're part of. The Condor and the Eagle, and the message it brings is already old, as new as it is, because we're in an ever-changing moment during this time of purification, during this time of prophecy. Each one of us works in different organizations, and they can use very real, tangible financial support. And that's a big help so that we can do the work on the ground. With movement rights, we're doing inter-tribe forums. Within my tribe, we're trying to readjust our constitution, which takes time and money, to be able to reflect a law, a statute that we have created. It's silly to say we've created. that we have been instructed to recognize that and we spoke of this earlier, not here protecting nature, we're nature protecting itself. And so we have this statute called Rights of Nature that gives and recognizes the personhood of all living things, which in the Indigenous viewpoint seems kind of redundant in many ways, because that is our everyday life for those of us who live a traditional way. But we need support in being able to do that. We need you to go to if you have political affiliations and say in our territory and the area we're caretaking, we want to have rights of nature recognized as a law and utilize that as a tool to protect us against the extractive industry killing all life on earth, beginning with our precious relative, the water, the precious relative, the wind, precious relatives, the gas and oils that rightfully belong inside our mother, the earth. Last week we had a 4.5 earthquake here in Oklahoma, directly related to fracking and injection wells. Millions and millions and millions of gallons of water are being sacrificed, and those are the birthright for children's 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 children to be able to have that water to drink and this air to breathe and this food to eat that is part of the natural source of life. So again, long answer to probably a short question, but is recognizing ourselves as a portion of the living Mother Earth. Right, Brian?
Yeah, wow. And my internet is kind of acting up too. So if there's a delay or anything, I just want to apologize. And these are some of the things that for Casey, she's in Oklahoma, but in a rural part. These are just some of the disparities that we're also trying to help with, right? In the process of doing this film and having screenings, because without the support, we wouldn't have been able to even have Casey join us for a lot of these. So, I just want to say that, and it's pretty typical of a lot of our communities. So I'm lucky. I live in Houston. It's a big city. I'm lucky in that respects, but I still have issues, right? Because of the neighborhood that I live in, perhaps. But I did not grow up knowing, what my tribal affiliation was. And I think, when people ask me that question, how they can support Indigenous communities, I think, for me, that's a really, it's a difficult question because of the erasure that has happened throughout, the centuries of colonization, that for someone like myself, there has to be a process for you to even identify as Indigenous, and there's so many names. I think there's more names for someone like myself than probably anyone in the world that I'm aware of, right? It's like Latino, Hispanic, Mestizo, Chicano, Mexican American, on and those are the nice terms, right? Or the nicer terms. So I identify as Chicano, but it's seeped and rooted in Indigenous culture from Mexico, from Texas, from the Southwest, from all over the region, and yet, for most of my lifetime, and I think for most of the folks in the U.S., in Canada, And, throughout the world, I would simply be a Mexican, to them, without any kind of thought about what that means. And because there's a nation state, right, you somehow lose your indigeneity, and you're somehow supposed to identify as a second class Spaniard, or a second class, you know, Italian, or whatever you think we are. and so that's a really important thing I wanted to say, because one way to remedy that is to support processes that help educate our communities, so that we can better understand who we are in the first place, right? So I've been fighting for ethnic studies in schools for 20 years, the same amount of time that I've been fighting, for environmental justice. And there's a reason, and I think there's a really strong connection to both of those two worlds and that work. Because what I've found is that in learning more and discovering my own identity as an Indigenous person, that has helped me better understand my responsibility, right? And my gratitude for being alive, for being provided with everything that we need from the planet, from the earth. And it helped me recognize, why I felt so isolated and so distant and so invisible in this country, right? That Black people have always been from, and that I'm supposedly a part of, and so that's a really important thing, I think, for folks that don't live near reservations, who don't live, in areas where there are recognized, tribal members, but that there are Indigenous people, and urban natives, detribalized individuals who are also, part of this fight and struggle. And I feel, when I went to Peru in particular, like I saw that same kind of work that needed to happen. When two sort of worlds collide, and there's just a lot of confusion and loss and grief and sorrow. So I'll stop there. I could say so much more. And I'm really interested, what Pedro's thoughts are on that, being in a very similar situation as myself, perhaps, but definitely being in a big city and a part of the world that is very diverse.
Very grateful. I think it's a deep reflection and very meaningful on these times that we live nowadays. And for me, for myself, when you say, like, for example, of the invisibility of someone, or being part of this environment and working for, how can I say, it's what Casey said before. It's not about working for building a better nature, but cooperate with nature. Nature do not need ourselves, but we need nature, in the sense of it's about it's about a mindset perspective. Earlier today I were in some dialogues, and for me it was very meaningful, the reflection from the words. I think the words are very meaningful, and shows our perspective of the world and our relation with everything. And for example, from sources to resources, and Casey say many times about sources of life. And if you see as a utility perspective, you see as a resource, but every resource comes from a source. So it's about getting a different relation with everything we have. And for me, something that were very meaningful is that the humankind do not come out of the Stone Age by the scarcity of stone, but by seeing the stone as a different tool, or have different relation with the stone. And this is something, when we see as a resource, sometimes it goes straight to scarcity. And when we see a source, it's about abundance. It's about where it comes from. And the life is abundance. But we always come from a scarcity perspective. And this I bring from the Invisibles. I also always come with my guardians that this is also come from cardboards. And most of the activisms and the things that I do, it comes from the cardboards, and it's everywhere. It's like a methodology that I developed to develop activisms that you can do everything from cardboards, depending on, we can see like the resources are, we have a scarcity of the resources, but the human creativity, it's unimaginary. Like the resources are limited, but human creativity not. So this is how we can use the world to transform and to build the world we want. And at building the world we want in the sense of being part of the world and being part of nature, not do something for nature, but be part of nature in the sense of I don't know if I go out of the question a little bit, but when we say a fragment, when we try to see as a fragmentation, I try to see what connected, and the way that we get related to everything brings these two perspectives of scarcity or abundance, and from sources to resources in this perspective. So, and this is related to the object of the film about the oil company. It's about we do not need to run out of oil. Leave it there. For indigenous, for example, for some places that they are sacred places. So this is much farther than what we can understand from now, but this is life. So we should better use than just burn it. But
that's amazing. Thank you. I guess I'm seeing a bunch of really, really cool questions in the chat and in the Q&A box. Feel free to keep dropping them. I did want to ask one more moderator choice question, my own. It's just, you just watched a great movie featuring some of the folks here, and I'm also super curious to hear from Pedro as well. Maybe each of you could just paint us a picture about what it's been like the past few months with the pandemic going on, with all these crises going on, and tell us a little bit about what activism has looked like for you these past few months and since the film ended. Anybody can go. Maybe Casey. Elders first.
See, she's learning too, Casey. This is good.
I'm so proud. Yay. Activism. Okay, in one corner, as I listen to you all, see the American Indian Movement flag that's standing with the staff of the woman in our tribe, my family, myself, my girls are the hereditary keeper for the Women's Society. And we have that staff standing there, and a staff of the American Indian Movement flag. And I'm reminded that today, I believe it was around 45 years ago, my brother Carter Camp, leader of the American Indian Movement, war chief of the Wounded Knee 73 occupancy, one of the leaders of the Trail of Broken Treaties to Washington, D.C., was on trial for participation. He was the only person to spend prison time after Wounded Knee. And while his trial was going on, they attacked Jumping Bull Camp, the FBI did, up in the Dakotas. And eventually put to trial and imprisoned Leonard Peltier. And today is that day that they attacked that peaceful camp. So today, our prayer is with some of the original American Indian movement warriors, Leonard Peltier, who's still a prisoner of war in the penitentiary for a crime that was manufactured that he did not commit. I want to commemorate him. So activism for me is a word that simply is life. It is simply life. I see a picture that someone gave me over on another wall, October 27th in 2016. I went to see my sons, Mikasi and Jeff, and my grandsons up Standing Rock, South Dakota, where they were protecting the sacred water from oil. And that's Nishude, the Missouri River. It's the water that smokes, that water that has spirits walking on it, that they were protecting. And I was there to be with them in prayer in an unarmed camp. And we were attacked by the militarized police. And 142 of us went to jail that day. We were imprisoned that day in dog cages in a basement. And we had numbers written on us, like Holocaust victims. And I see that picture over there. That was 2016. I saw my son in a cage by himself. Saw my other son. It's too much to think about right now. On another wall, I see a picture Mikasi brought to me of the Sundance, our sacred religion that has been outlawed by the United States government and the state of Oklahoma. Freedom of religion is a joke in the United States. You're only free to be a Christian, and that's only if you meet a certain criteria of the kind of oppression that we've endured forever. So what does activism look like to me? It looks like life. Like planting a garden with my grandchildren in the front yard out there with sacred ponca corn that has existed from the beginning. It looks like our ceremonial place down there. Brian knows where that is, where we go to pray in our what's called a sweat lodge, Unique. It looks like this Star Nation quilt behind me that reminds me that our ancestors knew the stars like the road maps to eternity and the road maps through the seasons. It looks like having my babies come out and help take care of the yard for us, even though we can't hug. It looks like taking a moment for the earth and the sky to breathe so that humans can realign themselves with the natural laws and come together as you and I are doing right now, Extinction Rebellion, so that we can together find a way forward. Yeah, it looks good to me.
Wow. I think you wrote several poems in that monologue, and maybe even like a chapter for a spiritual book. And I wasn't shushing you. I was like, shh, don't tell them where the sacred sites are, because then they'll want to build a pipeline. You know, we have some infiltrators. There's always one listening. But, you know, it's, how can I add anything more to that? I'll tell you my own sort of personal experience with like the situation and the current moment, and it's I guess how it's sort of connected, or how I've been connecting with it. So we all know that there's been a great deal of just exhaustion, right? And folks are fed up, and we've been forced to contain ourselves, our physical bodies in our homes. We've been forced to avoid gatherings of large crowds, and I think, you know, it's created a situation where some folks are okay with that and some folks are not. Um, and it's been a real test of people's own temperament and endurance. Um, and it's tested their faith, right? In government, in each other, in science. Very much like I think the debates around climate change have been. And, you know, all that kind of just came to a head when we saw the violence continue, when we saw, you know, police continue to just kill us in the streets, when we saw pipelines and, you know, other destructive processes continue on. Um, it was an assault on our faith and trust, and I think, you know, that's helped lead to this incredible surge of activism and, you know, just resistance out in the streets, and it's been really beautiful to see. And, you know, I'm in a city where George Floyd grew up, not too far from where I'm at. I'm in a neighborhood that's maybe 4 or 5 miles, again, you know, from the ship channel, 4 or 5 miles from Third Ward. And it's actually, you know, the same kind of area of Houston that I grew up in, that George Floyd, you know, grew up in, that I still live in. And so it was really a really important moment for this city, and he's around the same age as I am too. So I think, you know, just the culture of the city, the moment and time, you know, that helped create who George Floyd was, you know, is something that I can familiarize myself with. We obviously have very different life experiences, um, but that's something that, you know, really resonated with me. And right now, we're in the midst of a really big curve, um, in the wrong direction. And today, you know, our county and our city raised the level of concern to the highest possible. So we're in a worse situation right now in terms of coronavirus infections than we were in March, than we were in April, than we were in May. So there's just been a terrible response to how to deal with this. And, you know, folks will point fingers at protesters, will point fingers at businesses opening up. But really, it's been a failure of all of us, and, you know, our inability to work together. Like, this pandemic has really shown that we are all connected globally. We are all connected. We have to work together to solve problem like this. And I think it's a test. Like, it's this just incredible test, um, that we should learn from, that we can still, you know, make a significant shift in the trajectory of how many people will die. Um, you know, and that's kind of where my head has been. I've lost a lot of family in the last 3 to 5 years, many to cancer. We've had devastating storm that you saw some of the impacts in the film. Since then, we've had multiple chemical disasters here in the Houston area, and just the whittling away of regulations and checks and balances on these companies. So much so that they're like telling the president, wait, telling the EPA, wait, no. We wanna report some of our emissions, so we don't look so bad. But that's where we're at, and I think it's a test. It's a moment where we have to really respond collectively, and we're running out of time. Yeah. So I'll leave it at that. Just to touch on some of the questions and comments that I saw too. That means that we have to address the racial disparities. That fourth clause or demand, that's an important one. So kudos to everyone who pushed for that. Yeah. I'll pass it to Pedro, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I took some notes, and I don't know how should I start, but for me the main question is how to act and how to make an activist in these COVID times. And as Brian said, like I'm also from a big city, supposedly like Rio de Janeiro, and I'm always very carefully on saying that Rio de Janeiro do not represent Brazil. Brazil is like a continent and have a different perspectives and voices. And Brian also said about the life differences, and each reality is one reality. And but in these COVID times, we see the need of being at home, and we all share the same home, that is Earth. But in Brazil, especially, we see that the indigenous communities is not about only indigenous, but the forest people, because in the forest we have in Brazil many different also communities than also only indigenous. We cannot say that we have people ribeirinhos, that we say from the rivers, and we have quilombolas that are Afro descendants, and we have different people that, for example, in Amazonia is a very diversity in terms of ethnography. I don't know how to say in English, but what I would say in terms of acting in the COVID times is that when we understand and we feel that we are all connected, we also are being able to be connected now, for example, by the internet, by the communication access. And this is some way a right in Brazil, the right to communication and the right to be connected, but some way it's difficult. So for example, waste, it's also about the resources that also relate to sources of connecting voices and bringing this all together. And something for us that is very meaningful, it's about collecting and providing a communication resources to the communities. For example, old cell phones, and sometimes it's not only about the money, but facilitating to get connected, because it's not only about the, it's also the money is about a way to exchange and to facilitate it. But if you ask indigenous, they never need the money, but they need a cell phone sometimes, and they need the Wi-Fi to be in a place like that, in a space like that. So I am always very careful to say, I'm not saying that they have their voice and their voice are very powerful, and I'm not here to say their voice, but I'm here to say they need a telephone. They need a cell phone to be able to connect. So in the sense of it's a different way of relating and providing resources and to getting connected. So in this moment of COVID times, we clearly see that in Latin America and Amazonia in general, that all the different countries that share Amazonia, we need to provide basic access to communication, to humanity or human dignity. And it's not about not only allowing the virus, or because in Brazil this is a very hard moment in the sense of all the politicians that we have at the moment. COVID come in the worst moment it could be, because we do not need COVID to destroy Amazonia, but then the COVID comes to really destroy the ones that the ones that defend Amazonia. So we really need to come and see a strategy and a way to come all together to protect these people, you know, like providing them access to, they do not need them, like they need to do tests, they need to be able to get isolated, and like and these are related to resources as we are.
Thank you, thank you. I'm seeing some comments in the chat about the upcoming American elections, and whether our strategic focuses as movements should be on electing the current president out. I really liked, somebody in the chat said that Trump is a symptom, not a cause, and I really like that, because there are millions of people who voted for him, and there are tons of structures historically and presently that have created someone like him and made it not only possible but very probable that people like him continually have power. And so I'm now speaking in the capacity, I guess, of not, you know, for those of you who are here from Extinction Rebellion, you know that we don't have leaders or anything, so I'm not trying to speak on behalf of the XR movement. I'm speaking more just as a personal, just as an personal observer. I feel like the moment for the climate movement now is to truly become multiracial and become centered around justice, because Trump is a symptom of a much larger problem. And there have been so many times when, you know, I've been the only non-white person in a room full of climate activists. In fact, that happens more often than it doesn't happen. And that is also a symptom of larger problems. And I feel that obviously we know the climate and ecological crisis is dire. And not only is it dire, but it's already affecting people on the front lines, people who are not the right, quote unquote, race for the system, people who are not the right gender for the system, people who don't have enough money for the system. I don't know why that wasn't quote, that's real. And climate justice can't happen without racial justice. It can't happen without gender equality. It doesn't happen without structural economic reforms. And I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I do want us as a climate movement to think not only is it the ethical thing to do, but it is truly also the only strategically proper thing to do in this moment, without people genuinely being able to have a bit more faith in the power of movement and in the ability of certain folks in government to genuinely make change and push for those urgent reforms that are needed. It's difficult to call upon millions of people to mobilize if they have completely lost faith in government, if they are completely disenfranchised from the voting system, if they experience police brutality and police discrimination on a daily basis. So those are my 2 cents, sort of just responding to some of the comments about pertaining to structural racism and Trump and all these other things. I do want to address some of the questions. Give me a second. I'm reading through all of the new comments. Y'all type really fast. I'm gonna.
They're a chatty group, man.
Yeah. Any of the other panelists, feel free to jump in as well. But at any point. But I'm just reading through the comments really quickly.
While you look at that, did you have any thoughts on the upcoming elections, Casey? I had a thought, but I'm interested in hearing any perspective you might have.
You know, people talk about systematic failure, and I would say that the system is operating exactly as it was set up to be. The system is set up to kill us. It always has been. It always has been in place to do precisely what it's doing. What I do know spiritually is that this is the last gasp of the old white man and the last gasp of this type of society having the ability to make us believe in it. Because we have to have bond during this time of oppression, of colonialism, in order to feel like we were the good little guys. They'd pat us on the head. Now say Pledge of Allegiance. Now believe that your ancestors were wrong and ours were made kings for a reason. None of us believe that anymore. And there are more of us than there are of them. Their time is done. I think it's time for us to help them go out of. I personally believe that until things are a little bit more organized, I'm going to continue to vote, even though the choices are one old white guy or another old white guy. I just have to have Trump gone. And I don't particularly feel like counting coup on him because I don't think he's a worthy enough opponent. I want someone of honor to be able to count coup on them. But he has to be gone, and he will be one way or the other. I think we have to pay a lot of attention to our local policies and politics, and I know you do, Brian. I've seen you in action, and I really appreciate you. Our county commissioners in Oklahoma continue to be the ones that permit the oil and gas industry to be berserkers and killing all living things. The people who run the BLM, the folks that call themselves caretakers of the sacred sites, and all of those are the ones that we have to continue to focus in microcosms as well as macrocosms. We've got also very important that we attune ourselves to the greater understanding of where we're, because we want to go in to what is sustainable. When I talked about taking this time during the COVID time, I didn't deliberately ignore the pain and suffering of some of my relatives here that are losing loved ones, and many of the communities on the earth that are suffering. I feel them, and that's something that I believe that any empathetic person in right now, and it can create an inner chaos that doesn't allow us to move forward in the manner in which we have to do. It's like Judith was speaking of her healing during the time that she lives in a petrochemical prison. It takes a bit, but we don't have that bit. We have to heal on the run. We have to bandage ourselves as we move forward and take control of our own destinies. The old 60s maxim of if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. We have to hold others to the same standards as we expect. Here at home, we just have a small little, and you're familiar with a little 5-acre area we live on. But all the farmers around us know that this is a zone, and that if they want to try to use their chemicals around us, they better call us first, and we better talk to them about their intentions and which way the wind is blowing. Small things make a difference. So on every level, in every way, We have to stay on our toes, mentally, physically, and spiritually. And if you, Brian, I'm sorry to run this run through my mind. This feels like in our traditional ways, first of all, time doesn't exist in the Gregorian calendar or that thing they call a clock. We never did have those. We had natural time, you know, when the sun rises and the sun sets and the seasons had a purpose. This feels like the season of winter, where we were taught as traditional people in wintertime, you have to go inside your home and you have to be with your family and you have to grow spiritually. That's the purpose of winter. You have to be ready for spring in that time, but that was the time of storytelling, like you and I are doing right now, where we began to talk about our ancestors and what their deeds were, and we learn from them. We're making our plans for when spring comes and how we're going to go about it, where we might be, what seeds go in first. And our children are there with us on purpose, out of love, not because we didn't have a daycare to throw them in, not because we had to go to work, because they were important portions of who was going to be next. And they had to have things into them. And it feels that we're in the winter of our understanding. If we use it correctly, we're going to grow into knowing what to do in the spring. That's what it feels like. Yeah.
I could not have answered that question with such beautiful prose. So I'm glad you went first.
Thank you so much.
It's that elderness, you know.
Thank you so much. I've seen a lot more comments in the chat. I would definitely encourage those of you who want me to see it more and want me and my lagging computer to see it more, to post it in the QA session because there's far fewer things there. I wanted to flag for Casey and Brian and Pedro. Would love to see the film participants' names and their organizations with links. So feel free to answer that question and compile a list there in the Q&A session, because I'm sure people would really appreciate having links that they can follow and read into. Another question. This is a question from Ofri. Where are the weakest links to push on? What does that push look like? I don't know. I'm opening it up to anybody.
Say that again, Alice. I was typing. Sorry.
Multitasking is so hard. I get
What's
it.
the question? Yeah.
What are the weakest links to push on, and what does that pushing look like? I think I'm paraphrasing a little bit. I apologize, Ofri, but that's the general gist.
Yeah. I mean, that's a tough one. You know, I think that that's a local question because we have such an international cast here. I think that there are no easy pushes, but there are ones that we can control ourselves, right? And so first and foremost, it's always important to be as committed to justice ourselves personally as we should, and that takes deep reflection and analysis of your knowledge, your capacities, your respect, and your debt, right? In every way possible. So I'll just leave it at that. And I think folks are looking for more specific, fights. Like, is it KXL? Is it Trans Mountain? Is it all of those things? But I don't really operate that way, and I think that's more for the local groups to figure out. So if anyone has anything to add to that question, feel free.
Pedro or Casey, if either of you have anything to add, if not, no worries, we'll move on.
I can say that in terms of weakness, it's not, I think, the perspective I would like to see the point, but I have pointed the weakness at my perspective before, like most of it's related to the access of the rights, on the sense of in Latin America, in Amazonia, the reality, it's very how can I say, precarity, and things are, life is very difficult, but it's not should be, because there is a place of, for example, life, as a comment in the chat, life is abundance, so they should not be in this precarity, but to be in a globalized world, connected to everything, and being able to at least resist for this big pressure that big corporations from all over the world, as I said before, that the documentary points very well in some companies and some specific cases, but we can see that is a system problem, like as people say, like, it's not about climate change, it's about system change, and we need to not see exactly by the weakness, because for example, it's also related to, at my perspective, the Americans have been resisting for 500 years. Something that we are good on is about resisting. So and we should see as a reference of resistance some way. It's not about looking the weakness. It depends on which eyes it comes from, but some, I don't know how to say, like, but I feel that we need to promote the access to the rights, and this comes from resources, and this many times comes from fundings and different ways of managing the access to these resources. To the resources are tools to the rights, at my perspective. So this is how I see it.
Thank you. Alice, if I may. A few areas that we are trying to push right now on stopping KXL from coming from the tar sands across international borders into Turtle Island, all the way down to where my relative Brian lives, and then into the international market, is by trying to stop Liberty Mutual from insuring them. Because it's obvious right now, when the cost of extraction outweighs what they can make, that even they are losing their precious dollars to this extractive industry foolishness. And so to talk to a huge insurance people like Liberty Mutual, and to have a large group of people that all of us can connect with, telling them, look, don't insure these, because you're gonna go down with the ship, basically. They're gonna go down and you're gonna go down. So Liberty Mutual quit insuring KXL and TransCanada. One of the other things would be divestment. How do we keep Deutsche Bank from investing in KXL and TransCanada and the TC Energy rather, and DAPL and all of those. So people who really want to start divestment campaigns, there are many, many things that we can do. Start working on our own rights of nature, policies and statutes within the communities that we live in. It only takes one person talking to another person and another person. The type of organizing that we community organizers began with prior to the internet and cell phones and all of that was what we called kitchen table organizing. We sat at our mama's kitchen table with each other, the brothers and the sisters, and then the cousins and the uncles. And we'd eat together and we'd strategize together. And then we would take those thoughts out into our communities and we would gather more thoughts and we'd eat together again. And then from the community, we would reach out to the farmer ranchers around us and bring them in, and the unions and whoever else we had to. And that's how, this is our kitchen table. This is the new kitchen table. And our neighbors can be global. They always say, think globally and act locally. And that's what those old sayings are about. They work. So those are a few more thoughts.
Thank you. I see a few questions in the chat and Q&A specifically about trying to get in touch with Clement and his experiences as a filmmaker and asking who did the art and illustrations. Unfortunately, he's too busy for the rest of us. He's running right now trying to get a different screening like the one we just did set up for Australian audiences. So he won't be available to answer more questions, but I just dropped in the chat the website for the movie, and there is a contact form there. So if you have specific questions for the filmmaker about the film process, I highly recommend getting in touch with him and his wife and the rest of their team there, because I don't know the answers to these questions. Also being extremely cognizant of time. I know we've been around here for nearly an hour and 30 minutes now. I know time flies when you're having fun, clearly. So I do want to wrap it up for the sake of everybody and their bedtimes and not keep you on so long. But I just want to have one last question for all of us here in the panel. Just what are some last things you want to say to everybody who watched the movie? Brian, you're unmuted, so you go.
Okay. Ooh, yeah. Well, one, it's it wasn't an easy process, and I just have a lot of gratitude to Casey and Judith and Melina for putting trust in the filmmakers, right? Because it's not an easy thing to do, and I'll say this just about the process, that there were important lessons that we all had to share with each other, expectations, and at the end of the day, trust each other. And it's a good example of what we've been talking about here today. I work in an organization that like XR, and XR is pretty new. Sierra Club's been around for over 100 years, so it has a long legacy of problems that it's created in the world, in this country, that is not lost on myself or any organizer within the organization. So this is deep work that's happening not just in the political realm. It's happening in the places that we work. It's happening in our families, and it's happening even in moments where we're on the same team, right? Because we all are going to make mistakes. We've all been brought up in a colonized world, so we have to constantly fight against that, liberate ourselves, and understand what it means to be an authentically gracious being on this planet. So I just want to leave people with that. I think that's a good guide for how to move forward. And whatever processes and whatever campaigns and whatever fights and whatever struggles you decide to spend your time on, make it fun, man. Make sure it's fun. Be kind to each other, and make it fun for others too. Because whatever happens, I want to know that my life was spent with as much joy as possible. And even in moments where there's extreme violence and when there's, oppression, it's like we can continue to maintain our sanity, and enjoy just being alive. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all. Have a good night. And I'm going to pass it to my fellow panelists to share their reflections. And continue to support the film. There's more conversations happening that I think are important for us to listen to as well. It's the whole point of this.
Good words, Brian. I feel I feel like you said everything that I needed to hear, and I appreciate you very much. Now, the thing I believe that has always been part of our traditional teachings in the Ponca Nation, Brian said, be good to one another, take care of one another, love one another. That's it. Good night.
Maybe should say my last words. First, to say that I'm very happy and grateful for sharing the time and the space and being with you all. For me, it was a very nice experience. And maybe my last reflection should be that sometimes thinking on moving forward, it's to coming back to our roots, and that in that sense, the traditional and the indigenous communities have a lot to teach us. And in Latin America, especially Brazil and the country that I come from, most of the defenders have been persecuted and murdered. And this is also a symptom. We have been talking about symptoms before. And if we have a region that have a very huge biodiversity and different kind of sources of life, not resources, but seeing that each defender is a seed of resistance. And I'm not sure if you all are familiar with Pablo Paulino Guajajara and Berta Cáceres, but they are all watching you as nature's eyes, because they were nature defenders that I always say that someone that have died defending nature should not be called dead. It's alive forever. She's like she's back on the source, in the sense of it's seeds of resistance. So we need to keep in this movement and in this perspective of honoring and protecting the defenders and their habitats. So very grateful and looking forward for dialogues and working with you all.
On that wonderful note, I guess it's time to call it night. This is always the most difficult part for me because I don't want it to wrap up. But thank you so much to the wonderful film cast, and for Clement for putting this all together, and for Pedro for representing the much needed voices from other parts of our XR movement. and and his friends. All right. Good night, everyone. Bye.